We live in a world of 7 billion people, living in 7 continents and more than 200 countries. Today, it's more important than ever to count them all. But how can we possibly account for every single person on Earth?
Census is very important. It provides hard data for planning.
The census is the most complete snapshot of the situation of a population that you can provide.
In this way, it allows government, both national and local, to know the current situation and plan ahead for the future.
The population housing census is among the most complex and massive peacetime exercises a nation can undertake. It's huge. You got to map the entire country. You got to canvass all households. You got to compile information on every individual. You have to take that data, store that data, edit and clean this data, and then use that data so that you can base your policies on the evidence that is coming out of your census.
The United Nations Population Fund, or UNFPA, is the lead agency within the UN system supporting international efforts to conduct the census.
Might be replicated in other countries.
Their goal is to make sure all countries, even those facing financial or technical limitations, complete the census. But the challenges they face are as diverse as the countries themselves.
Without the census, policies cannot be based on evidence. There are countries that have conducted the last census in the 80s. They cannot judge on what has happened in the last 30 years. So it's very critical that every 10 years a census is conducted.
In many developing countries, the census is one of the few instruments that you have available to assess what the situation in the country is. And that has tremendous risks, but also tremendous opportunities.
But how do you conduct an exercise as complicated as the census in a country lacking even basic infrastructure?
Vous savez, nous sommes un pays qui figure parmi ceux que l'on considère comme les pays les moins avancés. Nos indicateurs sociaux comptent parmi, malheureusement, les plus bas au monde. Pour une meilleure appréhension des problèmes que connaît cette population, il est nécessaire de faire un recensement de la population.
Chad is one of the African countries who have been encouraged by the UN system to organize a census. But due to political situation, Chad have not been able to organize regularly a census.
For the past 3 decades, Chad has been plagued by rebellion, the most recent in 2008.
During the war, this area was not safe at all. And many people were killed and they were sent in water.
Chad has only completed 1 census in its entire history. Efforts to conduct a second in 2003 had to be aborted due to continued conflict.
People are afraid one about another. There is no confidence.
If we move from an emergency situation to a development situation, we need to plan. And census is a key tool for planning.
Nous estimons que le recensement est une opération importante, une opération même, je dirais, indispensable, parce que vous ne pouvez pas doser votre effort en réaction ou en écho aux différentes initiatives, aux différentes politiques, si vous ne connaissez pas tout simplement la population qui constitue en réalité la finalité de votre action.
Today, with financial and technical support provided by UNFPA, they are trying again.
Here, in this room, are kept the information from different cities. As soon as they receive the information, they give it to those who are typing them down.
It is very important to support the census. In many countries, the capacities, the technical expertise doesn't exist. So UNFPA comes in order to strengthen these capacities for countries to be in the position to implement a census successfully.
So the guy over there is from UNFPA. and he's training the analysis to type well and to analyze the result from the census. The census was really a change for us because all the politicians agreed that without the census, there cannot be election. And thanks to the census, together, we are going to build a country where life will be not difficult as it was in the past.
UNFPA has been able to engage with many countries to provide that kind of data, and we've done it all over the world. Even in complex situations like the Occupied Palestinian Territory.
In 1993, jurisdiction over the territory was transferred from Israel to the newly formed Palestinian Authority.
Prior to 93-94, we did not have our own authority. The Israeli police, the Israeli civil service took care of all the civil services. So the schools, the education, the building, the infrastructure. The census kind of defines the Palestinian population on the Palestinian territory. So I guess for the first time in these 20 years, we have an official definition of who are the people that the Palestinian Authority is responsible for.
But conducting a census while occupied is rife with challenges.
We have the separation and annexation wall. We have areas which is inside the wall and outside the wall. And there was really a huge challenge how we can go inside and outside in counting.
The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza really restricts the mobility of people in general. It separates clusters of population from each other, villages from each other. So for census purposes, you can see how that is a problem because if the field workers cannot access certain clusters due to checkpoints or due to the separation wall, then the census process cannot be completed.
We don't have accurate aerial photos because it's controlled by the Israelis, and they don't sell us full aerial photos for the whole Palestinian territory. So it's a big challenge to get accurate maps. You can't do any census without using maps, so it's crucial to have maps for the entire Palestinian territory.
That is how we conduct the census. We go house by house, family by family.
One of the major challenges was fundraising because we have actually recruited around 7,000 field workers, enumerators, data editors, data supervisors. So it was considered a really a huge national project.
In some Arab countries, you will not find this kind of information. Here you will have a full database for all the Palestinian territory.
It costed around $8 million. UNFPA worked with us hand in hand to try to find financial resources. And at the end, we were able to cover the cost of such a huge project.
I think it's very important that policymakers, decision makers in the government and also in the civil society should build their plans, their interventions according to what they receive from census results.
Planning without data from a census is like driving in the dark for most countries, particularly developing countries. Let's take, for example, the case of urbanization. In countries like Indonesia, urbanization will be the most important demographic phenomenon in the next decades. What is the relevance of this process and how census data can help in making urbanization a positive factor for development and not a negative factor?
Comprised of over 17,000 islands, Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago. And with over 237 million residents, it's the fourth most populated country in the world.
Indonesia is a country that's been growing quite remarkably. This is becoming much more of an urban society, and that's primarily because of the blurring between standard urban and rural areas.
This is the contrast, you can see in the background there are modern skyscrapers, but here, in this side of the city, you have slum area, poor or slum areas. Around 5% of the population in Jakarta live in this kind of situation.
The pace of migration, the pace of urban growth over the past decade or so have far outstripped the capacity and the ability of local governments to provide services. And certainly there are challenges in the field of housing, employment, solid and liquid waste management, and transportation.
As you can see, there are a lot of people on the roof of the train, indicating that we have bit difficulties in, supplying the good transportation.
The lack of public transport coupled with the inadequate public infrastructure such as roadways and traffic management have contributed to many of the challenges that we face right now.
Often the problems of urbanization are aggravated by the fact that countries do not plan ahead for these kinds of processes. And one of the things that the census can help you do is anticipate some of the processes that are going to happen inevitably by identifying early on what the migration streams are, what the situation is in rural areas, where you can expect people to leave and where you can expect people to go.
But conducting a census in a country consisting of over 17,000 islands requires an incredible amount of coordination.
Prinsip sensus adalah bahwa setiap orang tidak boleh ada satupun yang terlewat dan tidak ada satu orang pun yang bisa dicacat dua kali.
In some countries, populations are living in very random places, and so you got to find your enumerators actually to go and find those populations and enumerate them.
The big proportion of Indonesian areas are mountainous. So these are the typical footpaths that the census workers normally have to use, to do the census. It's even worse during the rainy season because it's very slippery. So you can imagine a census worker with a lot of questionnaires have to use this kind of path.
Despite the challenges, Indonesia's 2010 census is considered the most comprehensive in the nation's history.
The data is just so absolutely important in order to move forward with more informed policies and hopefully better programs to respond to the needs of those different populations.
Meanwhile, halfway across the earth, another country known for diversity is preparing to count its own population. Over 55% of Bolivia's 10 million people identify themselves as indigenous. Yet indigenous peoples have traditionally been left out of the political process.
In 2008, Bolivia changed its constitution. It passed from a republic to something called the plurinational state of Bolivia. What that means is basically that the state now recognizes the existence of 36 nationalities made up of indigenous peoples.
Hay una solicitud por parte de la población para llevar adelante los censos. Se han podido revisar la prensa y las solicitudes de la marcha que se ha llevado a cabo en el país. Uno de los puntos solicitar al gobierno nacional es que se lleve adelante el próximo Censo Nacional de Población y Vivienda.
For these people, having a census is extremely important. It's extremely important because they have been left aside from public policies in the past. But that means that districts, the census areas, the questions, etc., have to be adjusted so as to respond to the needs of these people.
Si bien este es un gran desafío, un gran reto para el INE, creemos que estamos con toda la metodología y estrategia que nos va a permitir cumplir con este objetivo.
Buenos días, buenos días. This is the cartography unit. They are completely dedicated to the census activities.
El UNFPA de Bolivia es el aliado estratégico que tenemos en materia de censos y gracias a la asistencia técnica y financiera del UNFPA, el INE de Bolivia ha podido presentar al gobierno un proyecto de censos que lo vamos a llevar a cabo el próximo año.
I believe that the fact that indigenous peoples are looking so much towards 2012 for the census to happen is because they realize and they understand fully the potential and the implications of having a good census for them.
Creemos que por el interés que tiene este proyecto va a ser uno de los mejores que pueda llevar adelante el INE en materia de censos en toda la historia que tiene en el país.
You cannot really act on the demands of a population if you don't know what those demands are. And in order to know what the demands are and what the needs are, you need to know who the people are and where they are and what their conditions are. So in many countries, we are also heavily involved in making the population conscious of the importance of the census and the importance of being counted.
Belarus is a former Soviet Union republic, and that's why probably it's not very much known. We've got our independence in 1992, and since then built an external and internal life as an independent country.
On one hand, it's better than in Soviet times because we have modern supermarkets, foreign clothes and all that stuff that globalization can provide to people. On the other hand, we passed through quite hard 90s and we're facing a lot of difficulties all the time.
Like the rest of Eastern Europe, Belarus faces an aging and shrinking population.
One woman in her lifespan is, in average, having 1.5 kids, which is not enough to keep us at the certain level.
Это вот как раз новая перепись, данные новые переписи, и позволили нам учесть, что происходит с семьей, и что нам надо сделать, чтобы изменить.
Results from the census revealed a far greater problem than anyone anticipated. And low birth rates were not the only culprit.
Это было на 500 тысяч меньше по сравнению с теми прогнозными статистическими показателями, которые мы имели. Если бы не было результатов переписи, мы бы понимали, что численность населения до сих пор у нас около 10 миллионов.
The census found out that there are basically less people than the official registration. And because the official registration sets up very well here, so births, deaths, everything is registered perfectly. So the only possible kind of explanation for this was migration.
Many people, especially in hard times, are going for work to Russia because we have quite transparent border. Actually, literally, we don't have any border. They don't need visas and they can make more money in there. Oh, okay. No, this is not the train. Here we go. This is the Moscow train. For example, I was working in Moscow for 2.5 years, and I was starting my Moscow career from this railway station. Like when census was going on in this country, I was outside in Moscow and I didn't participate in that. So many people do that. So they are uncountable.
But revealing the issue is only the first step. Policymakers have to access and utilize the data if it's going to affect the situation on the ground.
In that way, it's key the way we disseminate the information. We need to make this information very attractive in the way it is disseminated.
And it's not only governments. This is data that the private sector could use in planning.
Results of the census are presented in standard books, and this is, I have a volume number 7 on migration, actually, by the way. And you open, you have standard tables, how many people migrated into the country, migrated out of the country, and it's very difficult to operate these big books. So the role of demographers, scientists, and UNFPA is to build this bridge between demography, the figures, and the policymakers.
Посредством данной системы будет обеспечена единая точка доступа пользователей к данной системе через сеть интернет с официального сайта Белстата.
The goal of it is make it as user-friendly as possible and attract as much attention of policymakers and academia and students so that the data is as much used as possible.
Counting 7 billion across the far corners of the globe is a massive challenge. But as we look to the future, quality information about who and what we are today is crucial to meeting the needs of tomorrow. Every 10 years, the census counts everyone to make sure that everyone counts.